Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Shelley Reed. I am the manager of the Legal Services National Technology Assistance Project, otherwise known as LSNTAP. And we're here today for our session on designing trauma-informed ethical justice tech. And for those who are in attendance, I am a middle-aged white woman with shoulder-length brown hair, glasses. I'm in my office that has blue walls and pictures of my favorite place in the world, Pensacola Beach, where I grew up. And I am here today. I'm going to introduce our guest speakers. We have Sarah Maue, and Kaylee Balzer, and they're going to talk to us about designing trauma-informed ethical justice tech. And I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Great. Thank you so much, Shelley. Welcome, everybody. We're so glad you're joining us for this conversation today. I am here with my colleague, Kaylee, and we're from Innovation for Justice. We're the first cross-discipline, cross-state, cross-institution legal innovation lab in the nation. And we are housed at both the University of Arizona, James E. Rogers College of Law, and the University of Utah, David Eccles School of Business. And I'm going to hand it over to Kaylee to introduce herself before we get started.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. My name is Kaylee Balzer. I am the Service Impact Area Lead at Innovation for Justice. And don't panic if you don't know what that means, because Sarah's going to explain all of that next. I'm also a professor of practice at the University of Arizona and an adjunct instructor at the University of Utah. In addition to working with Innovation for Justice, I am licensed to practice law in the state of Arizona. I also maintain my national counseling certification and have 2 graduate degrees in mental health counseling. So that's really the background that I'm bringing to this presentation today. And Sarah, I'll turn it back to you.
Great, thank you. I'm Sarah Maue. I am the I4J Systems Impact Area Lead, excuse me, and a professor of practice at the University of Arizona and adjunct instructor at the University of Utah. I also go by UX for Justice Director, which is the name of my academic course that I teach that is part of the I4J Systems Impact Area, which aims to advance access to justice through human-centered technology design. My background is in many things, but most pertinent is in UX research and design. And I've been working specifically in justice sector technology design for over 5 years now. There's more about both of us on our website, so you're welcome to ask questions or to learn more about Innovation for Justice online. But as Kaylee said, I am going to tell you a little bit more about our organization before we get started. So Innovation for Justice is a virtual social justice innovation lab. We design and test disruptive solutions to the justice crisis. I4J works in support of the global movement towards legal empowerment that aims to create and enhance a participatory justice framework that empowers non-lawyers to understand, use, and shape the law. So we have 3 impact areas. You notice Kaylee was our service impact area lead. I'm the systems impact area lead. And these 3 impact areas are service, creating new legal service models, which is about leveraging regulatory reform to develop new legal service markets that legally empower underserved populations. The system impact area is about ensuring that justice sector technologies work for low income populations. And our structure impact area is about building tech for policy advocacy, which is collecting data to identify new markets for innovation and building tech tools for policy advocacy. And you might notice that those 3 impact areas do align with the know the law, use the law, and shape the law structure as well. All of our impact areas use the I4J approach, which is a combination of design thinking and systems thinking that enables us to work with and within communities to identify opportunities and design high impact solutions. I'm not going to go into detail about the I4J approach, but you can see here that it is design thinking and systems thinking combined. Okay, I had one animation in there for you. So the plan for today is I'm going to set the stage for how UX for Justice, the academic program that's part of the system impact area, came to develop our ethical tech design framework. Kaylee is going to cover what you need to know about trauma and the practical and the continuum from trauma awareness to trauma responsiveness. And I'll introduce our updated ethical tech design framework that we're using now and show you how we applied it in our last project. Kaylee is then going to talk about the impacts of trauma exposure response and self-care strategies for people working in legal tech design. And finally, after a packed hour, we are going to share some tools and tips for how to implement an action plan for trauma-informed research, ethical tech design, and self-care in your own work. We have some materials for you at the end. So we should have time for questions as well. If you do have questions as we go, as you can see in the chat, please add them to the chat and we'll answer right away if it's a clarifying question or follow up at the end with questions. We'll have time for that. Okay, so evolution of an ethical tech design framework. When designing our online court services and legal technologies, it's essential that we understand our users and their mindsets and the context in which they will use our online tools and services. And the design, the look and feel of technology can have a huge influence on how easy it is for court users or people who use the courts to comprehend content and how able they are to complete necessary tasks. So in our aim to innovate legal technologies to make them useful, usable, and accessible to anybody who needs them, UX for Justice has been developing an ethical tech design framework that guides our research and design practices. Now, initially, this entailed focusing on ease of use and ease of access. So for ease of use or usability is a measure of how easy it is for a user to accomplish their goals when using a product or service. And I'm sorry, when I talk about UX things, I often use the term user, which I know is not particularly people-centered. So I will shift back and forth during this to try to accommodate that. Ease of use, meanwhile, describes methods to create products that understand and enable people of all backgrounds and abilities. So let's take a little more detailed look at these two, which were part of our initial framework, which we've now updated. When we're designing for ease of use, we make sure to utilize usability heuristics or user interface design best practices. These are a good guide for ensuring that a tech tool will have a familiar and intuitive look and feel. The type of thing that our users, people who use our technologies, will expect from commercial digital products. Technology is such a large part of our life now, we really have come to expect a certain level of ease and consistency in our digital products. So the most common heuristics for interface design, interaction design, are Jacob Nielsen's 10 usability heuristics. You see these on the screen here. The thing about heuristics is that they're not hard and fast design rules, but they're more rules of thumb that can help guide your design decisions towards enhancing ease by addressing common problems that we know about, like error prevention and recovery, consistency and standards in a design. So people don't have to wonder if similar things do different things on different pages. Help in documentation, visual design decisions to make things easier to read and understand, and more. So these are the 10 usability heuristics. There's a lot more information available about them online, so you can learn more. But visibility of system status is about how the design should always keep users informed about what's going on through appropriate feedback within a reasonable amount of time. It's kind of like progress bars and step counters, so you know where you are in the system, or that little thinking spinning wheel that pops up, so you know action that you took is in process, even if the result hasn't happened yet. Match between the system and the real world has to do with the design speaking the user's language, using words and phrases and concepts that are familiar to the user rather than legal jargon in our case, or acronyms, which we often use. We want to use real world conventions, making information appear in a natural and logical order for the people visiting our digital tools. User control and freedom is about allowing people to make mistakes and undo those mistakes really easily, to leave an unwanted action and to go without having to go through an extended painful process. Consistency and standards. Users should not have to wonder whether different words, situations, or actions mean the same thing. There are industry conventions that we can all follow and make things look more familiar and easy to use. Error prevention is pretty self-explanatory on this one. We would prefer designs to be built to prevent problems from happening in the first place. So if we can eliminate error-prone conditions or double check with people to confirm an action before it's taken, these can prevent a lot of errors. Recognition rather than recall is about minimizing the user's memory load and making elements, actions, and options visible. Flexibility and efficiency of use is about offering shortcuts to speed things up for experienced users without diminishing the experience for new users. Aesthetic and minimalist design. It's about user interfaces not containing anything that is decorative or disruptive or distracting, so that we can just focus on the main content and help people get to the actions that they want to take as quickly and easily as possible. User error prevention is one thing, but if errors do happen, we want to make sure our error messages are expressed in plain language, are nearby the field that the error has taken place in, indicate the problem, and constructively suggest a solution. All of this in plain language, no kind of system codes that are mysterious to people. And finally, help and documentation is a huge one. It's best if a system is so intuitive, we don't even have to provide help, but that's not often the case when we're designing legal or court technologies. So really thinking through how to provide contextual help for folks and document how to use the system and how to understand the legal process and court processes is really important to our users. So all of this is a big part of what we have running through our minds as we are beginning to design legal technology. The other half that I first introduced was about prioritizing access, accessibility, and inclusion, so people of all backgrounds, abilities, and contexts can easily use the product and feel welcome to do so. And we do this by focusing on best practices for plain language, language access, mobile design, and accessibility. These, again, lots of information out there on these things, but briefly, plain language is about writing for your user, keeping it brief and to the point, eliminating unnecessary words like the ones I'm saying right now, choosing words that are familiar to your users and avoiding those acronyms and legal jargon that I mentioned, warm conversational voice and tone, respectful and humanizing person-first language. Clear and active verbs are really, really important for clarity and understanding. And the way information shows up and how you kind of title a page, subtitles, and clear headings and subheadings all go a long, long way towards making something plain language and much easier to read and understand. Language access, of course, we want to increase access to folks with limited English proficiency. So we might offer content in different languages that are spoken in your community, closed captioning of transcripts for video and multimedia content, and highlighting services that are available and offered in different languages so folks can find help quickly in the way that they need it. Mobile design we include because so many of our technologies are going to be accessed on mobile for a lot of people. And so it's really important for us to think about what that mobile experience is going to look like. One of the main things that we see is a lot of content on pages, which can make, while it may be doable on a desktop computer, suddenly on a mobile phone, it becomes really overwhelming. And so we think through how to present information most effectively for those small screens, and also how to take advantage of some of the innate features that exist in a mobile device that might actually make things more efficient or effective for people using mobile. So we can flip the script and think about the positives as well. And finally, accessibility compliance, which could be its own webinar. So there are lots of things that we can do with accessible design that also help everybody who is using a technology. And so some of my favorite examples of using accessible design to make it accessible and usable for everyone really is about offering captions and transcripts for those videos and multimedia, that makes it easier for anybody who either can't have the sound on or is in a noisy location and couldn't hear it anyways. Things like selecting appropriate colors and high contrast colors, make things easier for everybody to see, especially if you're looking at things in a bright sunshine when your cell phone might get washed out. So keeping that color contrast up is great. Using large centered touch targets are easier for anybody to click, but especially if you're sort of juggling that phone with one hand while you're doing something else. And offering help services through different modes of communication, including phone, chat, deaf and hard of hearing services and translation services, like I mentioned before. So there's so much more that goes into accessible design we can't cover in this, but know that that was a piece of what we were thinking about and integrating into our initial tech design framework. So all of these things that I mentioned so far, it's about prioritizing ease of access and increasing access for all users of our products. It makes everything easier to understand and use and benefits all of our users. So despite all of this focus on ease of use and ease of access, we were realizing that we still had a segment of users who were struggling with our justice tech or didn't want to engage with it. So we were hearing things like what you're seeing on the screen here, that it could be exhausting or very overwhelming, fear and the panic and the worry, frozen by fear, feel that they can't do things on their own, or frustrating, that it's so confusing that they hate it. People were expressing feelings of overwhelm, fear, lack of trust, exhaustion, decision paralysis. And at this point, we knew that we had to go beyond just designing for usability and designing for access, that there was something missing that we needed to make sure that we discovered and could incorporate into our technology designs to make it easier for people to address these feelings and this overwhelm. So we're going to shift gears here, and Kaylee is going to explain why it is so important to address trauma before we come back again and talk more about how we incorporated this into our new ethical tech design framework. So Kaylee, handing it over to you.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And as my usual disclaimer, if you've watched me present before, you've heard some version of this. I'm going to be talking about trauma. I'm going to be talking about the effects of trauma and how that shows up both in ourselves and the people that we work with and the people we're designing for. If that means you need to leave and watch this recording later, that's totally cool. If you need to turn your camera off, walk around, grab a drink, do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. Also totally normal to not have a reaction or a response as well. So just know that whatever you're feeling is the right thing to be feeling right now. You can go ahead, Sarah. Also, another disclaimer, I don't like the medical model, so I always start with a definition of trauma, and I really like this one. I think it's really important not to pathologize people who have experienced trauma, because surprise, we all have, especially if you are currently located in the United States at this moment. So this is my favorite definition of trauma. It's from Resmaa Menakem, who's a social worker, author, somatic abolitionist, and trauma specialist. And she says trauma is a response to anything that is overwhelming, that happens too much, too fast, too soon, or too long. It's coupled with a lack of protection or support, and it lives in the body. It's either stored as a sensation, as pain or tension, or a lack of sensation, like numbness. Next slide. There are a lot of different types of trauma. I'm going to just do super high level right now, knowing that this could be an entire webinar series, just explaining what trauma is and the effects of trauma. But just a couple things so you're familiar with it in case you aren't. So acute trauma is one episode of trauma. That's usually what people think of when someone says they've experienced trauma. It could be a car accident, a sexual assault, witnessing violence, but it's usually sudden, usually unexpected. Chronic trauma is when acute trauma is repeated. It's long-standing, repeated events. It can include a contentious divorce, abuse, neglect, things like that. Complex trauma is a little different than chronic trauma because it is multiple areas repeated. So it's usually exposure to multiple or prolonged traumatic events. And people often talk about complex trauma as having occurred in childhood and enduring throughout many years. It involves simultaneous or sequential occurrence of psychological maltreatment, neglect, physical and sexual abuse, could be domestic violence, and it's chronic. That's one of the things, the hallmarks of complex trauma. Another thing that's really important to note is historical trauma. And it's the cumulative wounding due to a massive group trauma, such as past events that exhibited ethnocidal or genocidal intent. This is persistent across generations. While it is called historical trauma, it's also important to note that the effects of this are ongoing, and also things that are happening right now could later be be perceived as historical trauma because its impact is going to last beyond this generation. The impacts of trauma. Again, this is very high level. Apologies if you've seen me present before, and this is a bit of a repeat. Happy to talk with anyone and dive deeper. But one thing that's particularly of note is that brain architecture is experience dependent. This is a phenomenon called neuroplasticity. That means our brains are constantly changing every day, every time we have an interaction. The way that trauma impacts this is due to the constant exposure of violence and traumatic events. Clients, the people we work with, can become locked into a state of fight, flight, or freeze, and that state is more permanent, it's more enduring. That's because the neural pathways in their brain, those are the strongest pathways in there because they're the ones that constantly are firing. This means that people react to normal experiences as if they were life and death threats. One of my favorite examples that has happened to me is receiving an email, and all of a sudden I feel like I'm being hunted by an animal. And it's like, okay, wow, that's my trauma response. An email is not actually a life or death situation, or at least it wasn't in that case. And it's really important to note this is not a rational or cognitive process. It's not a choice that's being made. It's wired into physiological response, so it's something that happens automatically. And so some other physiological responses to trauma beyond just what's happening in the brain. It really disrupts kind of every major system of bodily functioning: cardiovascular, your heart, your immune, your reproductive, neuroendocrine, all the hormones in your bodies, the brain, as I mentioned, and also GI, gastrointestinal functioning. It can result in immunosuppression and greater vulnerability to disease in the long term. This is all types of disease, from the common cold all the way up to cancer, and being able to fight off infections in the body. There's an increased risk of coronary events such as heart attack or stroke, and also can result in long-term changes to blood pressure. In terms of the nervous system, there are many more than three, but the three most common or most studied responses to trauma are fight, flight, and freeze. A lot of people think of fight as actual fist fighting, physical actions, physical movements, but fight can also show up as irritability, loss of temper, and defensiveness, especially in interactions. Flight can be physically moving away from someone, physically running away, but it can also be avoidance of making phone calls, avoidance of interactions, experiencing increased anxiety and increased fear. And freeze is one of the responses that is a little bit newer, but not unsurprising if you really stop and think about it. And freeze is when you just stop. You feel numb, you feel detached, and you may give up easily. Next up, I want to define re-traumatization. So the thing about trauma is it's not just like one experience and you're done and you never have to think about it again. Instead, the way that those memories are encoded in the brain is actually tied very explicitly to the emotional state that you were in when you experienced it. What this means is everyone who's experienced any type of traumatic event is at the risk of re-traumatization. And it's not setting specific, and re-traumatization is when you feel as though that trauma is happening again. Your heart rate may increase, your respiratory rate may increase, and you may fight, flight, or freeze. It can happen when recounting a traumatic event or exposed to any sort of sensation that triggers or activates that traumatic memory. You may be aware that it's happening, you may not be aware. And it may create or worsen existing trauma symptoms because the way the memories are encoded in the brain, every time that traumatic memory is triggered, it's re-encoding as kind of a new memory. But it's not all hope is lost. There are some bright spots because we know now that implementing trauma-informed practices can reduce the risk of re-traumatization. The most common triggers or points of activation for re-traumatization and also just trauma triggers in general are unpredictability, sensory overload, feeling vulnerable, feeling frustrated, and confrontation. Gee, I wonder what this sounds like. Maybe it's our legal system. We have an adversarial system. Confrontation is going to happen in some way, shape, or form. There's oftentimes people feel frustrated because they either don't have help, they don't understand the help that is available to them, or things aren't working the way they're expecting them to. The legal system can also be super unpredictable, especially because forms aren't always clear. Cool, this thing says 5 days. Does that count weekends? Does that not count weekends? When do I have to show up? Those are just a couple examples. I could do a whole webinar just on these. So as I mentioned, all legal processes can feel really unpredictable, can cause sensory overload, frustration, feelings of vulnerability, and or feel confrontational. Can feel all of those ways or just some of those ways. It's also important to note that one trauma trigger may easily trigger another. Again, this may be conscious, this may not be conscious. As people who are designing justice tech or who are helping people navigate the justice system, it's not important for us to understand what memory was triggered. Our role is not to help them move through that trauma. That is the role of a clinician, of a therapist. And it's really helpful to have partnerships with them if you don't already. And it's really important to identify the response and the behavior they're showing as a trigger and not something that they are voluntarily choosing to do. And it's important to respond in a trauma-informed or trauma-responsive manner, which I will get into more later. So you may be saying, Kaylee, what's the difference between trauma-informed and trauma-responsive? Well, I'm going to confuse you a little bit more first and also talk about trauma-aware and trauma-sensitive. So the Missouri Department of Mental Health has promulgated this continuum that goes all the way from trauma-aware to trauma-responsive. The legal system, I think, is starting to situate itself pretty firmly in the trauma-aware, with some getting into the trauma-sensitive, fewer getting into the trauma-informed, and my goal is to get us all the way to trauma-responsive. It's okay no matter where you are on this continuum because you can always move. I think of it more as kind of like a spiral where you start small and get bigger and bigger because I move through all of these probably 3 times a day. It's not something you do once and you check it off and you're like, yay, I did it. I never have to think about this again. It's constantly a practice. Trauma aware is kind of the basic beginning point. You have a basic understanding of trauma and its impacts. Congratulations, everyone in this webinar. You are now trauma aware if you weren't before. Trauma sensitive is one step up from that. And this is an active implementation of new practices and skills, and you implement them with interactions with others. You do this because of your understanding of trauma. Trauma-informed is, again, one step further, and along with doing the things of being aware of trauma and being trauma-sensitive, you are now promoting trauma-informed principles in all parts of the organization that you work with. You're working to mitigate re-traumatization risk, and you're working to promote environments of healing, safety, and resilience. So it's not enough just to be sensitive to trauma. Now you're moving to a little bit more active addressing your practices in order to account for people's trauma responses. And last but certainly not least is what I view as kind of like the gold standard goal, and that's to be trauma responsive. This is doing all of the above, but also implementing preventative practices. This approach is iterative, meaning you constantly take what you're learning and improve and improve and improve. And you really want to seek to meet the needs of those impacted by trauma, and you're constantly learning and incorporating new information. I have mentioned a couple times now trauma-informed principles. When I refer to those, this is what I'm referring to. SAMHSA is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. We can talk later about what's going to happen to these or what is currently happening. But if you need a copy of this, I have this. So I always am a resource if you need to access things and don't know where to find them. But what these principles are really a way to guide the work that you're doing. They kind of act as a North Star. It's not a prescriptive list. Again, it's not a checklist, but it's a way to evaluate what you're doing and where you can make changes. So there's 6 guiding principles, and they're safety, trustworthiness and transparency, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice, and cultural, historical, and gender issues. And I do want to note, we at Innovation for Justice are constantly implementing trauma-responsive practices, both among our own staff members, our own team, as well as with the graduate students that we train, the community law students that we train, and community members who contribute to our projects in various capacities. All staff, students, and community-based justice workers complete training in trauma-informed practices, and this includes what is trauma, trauma-informed practices generally, what is trauma exposure response, and what is trauma-informed language. We fold in trauma exposure response prevention to all of our course materials. It is an expectation like any other part of learning and practice that we do. It is not something bonus or added. I am our expert reviewer of our content for trauma-informed language, and Sarah does the design by members of our staff. We exhibit an organizational administrative commitment to implementing these trauma-informed principles. There's language on all of our syllabi. It's available on our website as well. So that anyone who's interested in understanding our values and understanding our commitment, that information is readily available. And we also talk a lot and implement community care because it's no one's individual responsibility to navigate a world that is filled with traumatic events. And we recognize that and have created structures in order to navigate it.
Thanks to Kaylee helping to create a trauma-responsive community within I4J. I realized that was the missing piece over on the tech design side. We were coming from the UX world. I was using standard UX principles, but designing for legal and justice sector technologies needed more. We needed more, and what we were missing was that trauma-informed design piece. So with the prevalence of trauma in our communities, and especially among justice-involved individuals, we realized that it really made sense for us to integrate trauma-informed design best practices into our ethical tech design framework. So as part of our commitment to being trauma responsive, we updated our tech design framework to integrate best practices for trauma-informed design, along with designing for ease and access. We all, we know that people who have experienced trauma may have a more difficult time using technology and understanding content. But that's only if it isn't designed with intention to meet their needs. There are things we can do to make it easier on them, so why not do so, right? So now we use the 6 principles that Kaylee mentioned for trauma-informed tech design as well. We know these, knowing these, we can make our survivors experience, we can make our court users experience easier by prioritizing safety, making sure that both the physical and emotional safety of all people using our technologies. We can do that by minimizing risk related to design. We can use that by minimizing risk related to using digital tools, by promoting security, privacy, and safety within the digital environments. We can promote trustworthiness and transparency by building trust and providing clear, respectful, and transparent information about processes, and ensuring that technology operates predictably and reliably. We can promote support by providing clear and easy to use self-help information and facilitating contact with support services and help resources. We can be collaborative by embracing involvement with real users in the development of our technologies, and through the technology itself by conveying the message that visitors are the experts in their own lives and ensuring interactions are collaborative doing with people rather than autocratic, doing for them as much as possible. We can promote empowerment, voice, and choice by supporting visitors' confidence in making informed decisions about what to share, when to make changes, and what would be best for their well-being. And we can promote the cultural, historical, and gender sexuality issues by avoiding assumptions or generalizations, being respectful, inclusive, and supportive in language and visual design. So when we added this layer in, suddenly we had a lot of principles, a lot of design principles to keep in our mind here. Adding the trauma-informed design principles was a wonderful addition, except that we were really kind of keeping 20 best practices in our heads at all times while designing, which frankly is a lot. Plus, some of these principles overlap with others. There's some gray areas in there. And it was just a little bit unwieldy as a framework goes. We needed to simplify. That's what we do in UX, right? We try to streamline and simplify and make things easier. So we iterated on our framework, and we realized that when you look at all of these best practices and really take into account their aims and their goals, 3 overarching themes came through for us. So we now use these 3 themes as the cornerstones for our ethical tech design framework to drive responsible tech innovation that improves access to justice. These 3 cornerstones are designing for ease, designing for understanding, and designing for well-being. So let's look at each of those in a little bit more detail. Designing for ease is about prioritizing usability best practices that guide design decisions towards ease of use, so digital tools feel intuitive for any person to access and use on any device. This is really about making it easier for people to use the technology, to make the technology system as easy as possible. The best practices or heuristics from that screen of 20 that we're using when we think of design for ease are the visibility of system status, consistency and standards, flexibility and efficiency of use, error prevention, error recovery, and aesthetic and minimalist design, which for us includes the mobile first design and the accessibility compliance that I mentioned earlier. Designing for understanding is about prioritizing methods to create digital tools that enable people of all backgrounds, abilities, and contexts to easily understand the content and make informed decisions and take necessary actions. So this one is really about making it easier for people to understand the legal system that they are engaging in. The best practices or heuristics we're using for these are trustworthiness and transparency, empowerment, voice, and choice, cultural, historical, and gender sexuality issues, which includes language access, translation, and interpretation, match between the system and the real world, which includes all of those plain language best practices that I talked about earlier, and help and documentation. And finally, design for well-being, our 3rd cornerstone, is about prioritizing technology design principles that intentionally reduce harm and promote healing. This is about making it easier for people to engage with both the technology system and the legal system by acknowledging the impact of trauma and recognizing that digital tools can cause or worsen trauma if not intentionally designed. So these principles that we apply here are safety, support, collaboration, user control and freedom, and recognition rather than recall. There are many tools in the UX methods toolkit, but these are just a few that we often use along with our ethical tech design framework. You'll notice that each of these methods kind of bring in different perspectives from different people to inform the work. So some of these techniques are part of our co-design approach, and some of them are methods that we apply internally before co-designing with the community. But all of these we look at through our ethical tech design framework in various ways. So we like to conduct cognitive walkthroughs. This is a technique that we use to evaluate the learnability of a system based on the perspective of a new user. It's actually an expert review method though. So we actually evaluate how easy it is for a new user to complete common and critical tasks on a site based on our experience as UX tech designers and other subject matter experts. As you navigate through the site, you complete a task and you pause at each stage and ask yourself a set of questions that get at, will users try to achieve the right results? Will they notice the correct action is available? Will they associate that action with the result they're trying to achieve? And once they complete that action, is progress made towards the goal. So the idea here really is taking a fresh look at a design, either an existing product or something that is new and being prototyped, and really thinking through, if somebody was seeing this for the very first time, would they find it intuitive, more or less? And so we obviously apply our trauma-informed approach here by considering the needs of a new user who may be in crisis. This is really helpful from a trauma-informed design perspective as well, because we can identify some areas that might be traumatizing or re-traumatizing before we would put something in front of real users for community engaged research. So that's part of our trauma-responsive organizational commitment, is to try to avoid causing re-traumatization as part of the research process. So that's why we do some of these expert review processes as well as our community engaged research. Another one of those expert review processes is the heuristic evaluation. Heuristic evaluation, again, is an expert review method, but the aim is identifying design problems in a user interface. They're typically performed by typically performed using those 10 usability heuristics that I talked about at the top of the hour. But for us, we actually take a look at it using our ethical tech framework. So we're looking at both usability heuristics and trauma-informed tech design best practices while we're doing the heuristic review, which allows us to identify issues in the user interface that may conflict with our goals to create ease, understanding, and well-being. Please note that while heuristic evaluations are a really powerful tool, they can streamline user research by improving designs prior to testing with real users. They should never be used instead of community engaged research. They're just one tool in your toolkit. But addressing those trauma-informed design needs as much as possible before testing with real users really is part of our trauma-informed research approach. So shifting gears, we do a lot of interviews as part of our research here at I4J. We like to talk to diverse system actors all across the system who engage with the issues in a variety of different ways. And this system seeking approach allows us to understand the problem from many different angles and surface potential bright spots to leverage. It ensures that we understand and appreciate the mindsets and viewpoints of many people in the system. And it allows us to understand where a digital product sits within the broader, more complex system, so that we can ensure that any solutions that we design will actually work in the real world. Interviews also help us understand attitudinal data, so how people think and feel, and we use them to kind of mine what's working well and what needs more work, and what would they like to see if they could come up with solutions of their own, or maybe already have. Having learning from what's already working within the community can be really, really powerful. We use trauma-informed interviewing approaches, and we talk to all sorts of system actors, including lived experience experts in our research. For usability testing, my favorite type of UX research, it's about testing existing products and prototypes to understand how real users or representative users can interact with a product, and it allows us to identify opportunities to improve that user experience. This is behavioral data, unlike interviews, which was attitudinal. This is behavioral data, so we're observing what people actually do, which is often not the same thing as what they say they would do or what they think they might do. So it's a really powerful research method. Usability testing is so important to understanding how well your products work in the real world for real people who need to use them. It's an integral part of our iterative design process, and we are always looking for insights that help us improve ease, understanding, and well-being through our usability testing here. Again, the key here is to test with real and/or representative users, so you know that what you are learning about your users' needs actually apply to the needs of the real people who will be using your technologies. And finally, we also do quite a bit of design review as part of our research methods, which is just reaching out to people with expertise in certain specialties, such as accessibility or language access, or trauma-informed design, and asking them to review a product with us so that, or a prototype often with us, so that we can gain some actionable insights and feedback about how to improve those specific areas if we really want to key into a particular area. It's a great way for us to learn more and to further our knowledge and expertise. And it's fantastic, like I said, about cognitive walkthroughs. Those fresh eyes, people coming in and seeing something for the first time is invaluable to any redesign or design project because we just get too close to it when we spend so much time working on something. So always reach out and collaborate where you can with other design experts. Okay, that was a lot in one slide. Really quickly, this is just an example of what we did with a project recently, how we applied that ethical tech design framework and the use of these UX methods to the project. We were partnered with a state court. We were working on improving survivor safety and access in virtual civil protection order processes. And these are the steps that we took as part of that project. We started with the existing system, the existing portal that they had. We did cognitive walkthroughs and heuristic evaluation. We did lots and lots of interviews, and we did usability testing with real users to understand, again, what's working well that we want to make sure that we keep in a redesign, as well as what are some challenges, obstacles, and barriers that people are facing? What are those pain points, and how can we improve those? Once we had all that data, we did a whole lot of analysis, surfaced some insights, some themes, did ideation around solving those problems with creative solutions. And then we built a prototype that we were hoping would address some of those problems. Then we did cognitive walkthroughs and heuristic evaluations on the prototype as well, because even though we just built it, it's important to go through and make sure that we're hitting those key elements of our ethical tech design framework. We also did an inclusive design review for this particular one with language access experts as well as accessibility experts. We knew we had some particularly challenging areas that we needed to address with those, and that was fantastic to get some fresh eyes on our prototype. And then we tested our prototype with again, real users of the system, real people who use the Civil Protection Order portal. And we took their feedback and we iterated it. And then we did it again. And then we took their feedback and we iterated it. And you'll hear that a lot. Iterative design is a really big piece of the work that we do. Getting feedback once is not enough to give you confidence that you have landed on the right solution. So always iterate as much as you can to refine and optimize your designs. So at this point in the project, we have applied all the usability heuristics repeatedly, trauma-informed tech design best practices. I think we did 5 or more plain language rewrites, just trying to keep refining and streamlining the content. We applied our mobile design best practices. We identified areas for improved language access, making sure to call out translation services that were available and services that were offered. And we identified and improved on those accessibility issues that I mentioned as well. So it's a whole lot to pack it into one project, but using the framework really helped us keep everything in mind and focus on our ultimate goals, really, which was about designing for ease, designing for understanding, and designing for well-being. All right, handing it back over to Kaylee.
I know we have been talking at y'all for a while, so I'm going to zip through these so that we can save a couple minutes for questions. So again, if you have any questions, let me know. I'm happy to set up a meeting and talk about any of this further. So something that we'd be remiss if we didn't mention is trauma exposure response. You may know about this as secondary trauma or vicarious trauma. And what it refers to is changes within the professional due to exposure to trauma material, usually not their own. So when you're working with a client, working with anyone who's in crisis, you will embody some aspects of their trauma. It can disrupt your feelings, personal relationships, and worldview. This is just me showing that I'm not the only one who thinks that professionals can experience trauma exposure response. So here's a citation, actually a string cite of a few different ones that show empirically that legal professionals and advocates really feel effects of working with trauma survivors. Here's a list of some cognitive symptoms of trauma exposure response. So things to look out for if you start noticing these in yourself, because that means you need a little bit more self-care and a little bit more community care, including concentration difficulties, not being able to read a page without having to go back and read things like that. Behavioral symptoms, also being impatient, irritable, withdrawn, more so than your usual baseline. And losing things, misplacing keys, not knowing where you wrote something down. Things kind of that seem simple can be a key to show you that you may need to take care of yourself and ask for some help. Some emotional symptoms are a lot of feelings of powerlessness, feeling like you're on an emotional roller coaster, feeling kind of helpless, not being able to stop thinking about the trauma experiences that you're bearing witness to. And relational symptoms. We do not exist in vacuums. The people we design for do not exist in vacuums, and we're constantly interacting with each other. And trauma exposure response can show up in that too. So you can stop talking to people, you can withdraw, you can not trust people that you used to, feel decreased interest in intimacy. The one that is like a blaring red alarm for me is reduced tolerance for what are perceived as others' petty problems. Like their problems aren't nearly as bad as my problems, so they just need to get over it. And physical symptoms, as I mentioned before, impaired immune system functioning. That's true if you've experienced trauma yourself, but also bearing witness to others, as well as aches and pains and illness generally. So what can you do? Again, not all is lost. There are things that you can do. One thing that I teach all of our community-based justice workers and all of our students is the ABCs: awareness, balance, and connection. If you're not aware that there's a problem, you can't do anything to address it. So awareness also includes acknowledging things, acknowledging that it's normal to be affected, that it's okay to feel whatever you're feeling, whether it's outraged, scared, helpless, horrified, angry, numb, something else not in this list, and also acknowledging our own needs, limits, emotions, and resources. I love to pretend like I'm superhuman. I'm not. I have the same 24 hours in a day that everyone else has. And we can't be everything for everyone or do everything. The B is balance. We use something called a wellness wheel, which you will have access to later, that talks about 7 or 8, I don't remember which version we used, dimensions of wellness, and trying to find balance in all of those areas so that you're not only focused on work to the detriment of your other well-being, or only focused on your financial well-being to the detriment of your physical well-being. That'll make more sense when you dig into the materials from this session. And third is connection. As I mentioned, no one exists in a vacuum. We can't be expected to do this work alone. So who are you connecting with? Who are trusted people in your world? Connecting to yourself, your family, blood family, chosen family, however you choose to define family, colleagues, and friends outside of the profession, the community at large, and something larger than yourself. Address the stress. I have in bold self-care, self-care, and more self-care. Self-care is really important. It's not going to fix everything. So that's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Something that's also important is recognizing the difference between self-care and self-indulgence. Sometimes self-care is doing the really hard thing, like leaving a gathering with friends early, even though you're having a lot of fun, because you actually really need those 9 hours of sleep because you haven't been sleeping well. So just being aware of what's filling your cup while also trying to maintain some continuity with that. So hanging out with friends may fill your cup up for the evening, but then you wake up and you're depleted again because you actually only got 5 hours of sleep when you really needed 9. And here are some other suggestions for addressing the stress. And it's really individual dependent. Something that works for me is probably not going to work for Sarah, which might not work for Shelly. So I really encourage you to try a lot of different things and get your coworkers, your friends, your family on board too. I love trying new things with people. So I can invite a friend to check out a meditation with me or um, share my goals with some of my friends and family. Say, hey, I want to practice saying no more. So if you keep asking me things and I keep saying yes, help me with that. Call me out on that and remind me that that's something that I want to do. And again, community care. Trauma exposure response and trauma in general is not something that you or me or anyone needs to deal with or manage alone. It is a fact of life that it's something all of us are going to experience in some way, shape, or form. And what matters is how we address it. So I think that community care is also a really important part of trauma-informed practices, even though it's not necessarily explicitly named in the principles. So I encourage everyone to seek out opportunities to connect, whether it be about work or about your personal life, about a hobby, really about anything. Just create those lines of connection for yourself so that they're there when you need them. And as promised, we have some suggestions for how you can implement trauma-responsive research and design practices in your own work. Emphasis on practice. It is a practice. It's always changing. It's not a checklist. But you can focus on operationalizing the 6 principles. So looking at what you're already doing and seeing how they map onto the 6 principles. Making sure your team is all on the same page is really important, especially when thinking about building safety and trust within your organization and your organization's external communications with others. I think it's also really important to stay up to date with new developments in the field of trauma-informed and trauma-responsive practices. Congratulations, you're already doing one of those with this webinar. I know that there's a lot of continuing legal education units popping up here and there about it. I do want to say a word of caution. I think that it's really important to think critically about who is presenting that information, what is their qualifications, what's their background, how do they know what they know, and do they back it up? There's some working groups popping up here and there. You can bring this information to a working group that you're on to learn more. And you can also set up article notifications through Google Scholar as well. And create a plan to prepare for trauma exposure response. It's a lot easier to assume it's going to happen to you and then be surprised when it doesn't than the alternative. So know what your baseline is, know what your normal stress levels are, and how to identify when they're getting higher. You should set realistic and specific goals. Know what your definition of success is. Know when you meet that goal, how will you be able to identify that? And again, think about wellness in all areas of your life, not just work or not just one or the other. And it's really helpful, I think, to create a list that you can reference when you notice symptoms of trauma exposure response. I have one actually back here on my bulletin board that's like a menu. So if I'm feeling really low energy, here's things that I know I can do today. If I want to plan in advance, there's some more complicated ones and just a menu of options. It goes back to what Sarah was saying with cognitive load and being able to just recognize instead of having to recall. And also be proactive. Find a supportive group of people that you can trust who you check in with regularly.
Thank you. Kaylee and I care about this so much. We really talked a little bit longer than we meant to. We didn't leave all that much time for questions. We can take one if there are any, but we also put together some materials for you to take a look at on your own afterwards. As Kaylee mentioned, there's a self-care plan sheet in there with the wheel she mentioned, which is really helpful. I encourage everybody to take a look at that and make that bulletin board for yourself so that you have some resources available at hand. We also have a couple articles in there, and I have an article in there that describes a little bit more in depth with more research about how we came to our ethical tech framework. If you need a little bit more background or resources to learn more about that. So take a look at that link. It's bit.ly/I4J Elisenta. I4J-Elisenta. or you can use the QR code on the slide there. So if you have any questions for us, let us know. Obviously, we're out of time here today, so you're welcome to email both me and Kaylee if you do have any questions or would like to further the conversation after this. So thank you, everybody, for following along with our conversation today.
That was really very informative. I have so many things written down, and whether you're thinking about technology or not, so many things can be put into place for professionals working in the field, but also thinking about clients. How do how do we protect our clients? But there was so much also for all of our staff and everything. So thank you so much. It obviously is a topic that we have to delve into further. I really appreciate you being here, Kaylee and Sarah. Thank you for the resources. I know that they're going to be really helpful for everyone. Um, and I know the hour is up, but I will stick around for a few minutes if anybody has other questions. um, so have a great afternoon, everyone.